In the quiet village of Alderwood, nestled in the heart of England, lived an old man named Mr. Edwin Holt. His years had graced him with silver hair and a soft, thoughtful demeanor. Edwin had spent most of his life as a schoolteacher, guiding children through the wonders of knowledge, but in his later years, he had become known for something else: his extraordinary storytelling. The villagers often said that Edwin's words could bring forgotten histories back to life, make the stars shine brighter, and even help the most broken-hearted soul find hope. But Edwin didn't see himself as a master of tales. To him, the stories were simply a way of sharing something meaningful with others, little pieces of magic passed from one generation to the next. Every Saturday afternoon, people from all over Alderwood would gather in the village square, under the shade of an ancient oak tree that stood as tall and wise as Mr. Holt himself. Children and adults alike would sit cross-legged on the cobbled street, waiting eagerly for his words to paint worlds in their imaginations. One bright autumn day, the air crisp with the smell of fallen leaves, Edwin sat on his familiar bench, gazing out over the gathering crowd. His cane rested against his knee, and he wore a woolen cap that had seen many winters. He was thinking of what story to share today. His audience, ranging from small children to their parents and even a few elderly couples, all looked to him expectantly. Today, he had decided, he would tell them about someone extraordinary, someone they all knew but perhaps hadn't fully appreciated. He cleared his throat gently, and silence fell over the square. Today, he began, I want to tell you about a man named Thomas. His voice was rich, weathered by years, yet still warm and inviting. Now, Thomas wasn't a knight or a great adventurer. He didn't sail across oceans or discover new lands. No, Thomas was a farmer, right here in Alderwood, many years ago. He lived quietly, humbly, tending to his small patch of earth. Yet Thomas did something remarkable. He made the world around him better simply by being kind. Edwin paused, letting the words sink in. The children fidgeted slightly, unsure if they were ready for a tale that wasn't filled with dragons or treasure. But the adults leaned in, sensing there was wisdom to be heard. You see, Edwin continued, Thomas wasn't rich. In fact, he barely had enough to feed himself most seasons. But what he did have, he shared. When his crops grew well, he would leave baskets of vegetables on his neighbors' doorsteps. If someone's roof needed mending, Thomas would be the first to help, even if his own roof was in need of repair. The villagers exchanged glances, some of them nodding in quiet understanding. They knew people like Thomas, people who gave even when they had little to spare. One winter, Edwin said, his voice softening, there was a terrible storm. The winds howled through the village, and the snow piled so high that many couldn't even leave their homes. Food was scarce, and people began to worry about how they would survive the cold. He paused again, looking out over his audience. But Thomas, despite his own meager supplies, went from house to house, knocking on doors, offering what little he had, a loaf of bread here, a handful of dried beans there. He knew it wasn't much, but he gave it freely, without hesitation. A small child in the front row raised her hand, her eyes wide with curiosity. Did Thomas have enough food for himself? Edwin smiled, a glint of admiration in his eyes. That's a good question. No, Thomas didn't have enough food. But he believed that if he shared what he had, others would do the same, and together, they would make it through the storm. And did they? Another child asked eagerly. They did, Edwin replied, his voice full of quiet pride. Because Thomas's kindness inspired others. Soon, everyone in the village was sharing what they had: firewood, blankets, whatever they could spare. The storm lasted for many days, but no one went hungry, and no one was cold. Thomas's generosity had saved them all. The crowd was silent for a moment, the weight of the story settling over them like a soft blanket. Then, Edwin leaned forward slightly, his eyes twinkling. But you see, he said, the story doesn't end there. Because Thomas's acts of kindness didn't just help the village survive one harsh winter. His generosity created something much more lasting, something that has carried on, even to this very day. He looked around the square, his gaze resting on each person in turn. The people of Alderwood, generation after generation, have always been known for their kindness. Not because we have more than others, but because we share what we have. And that, my dear friends, is the true magic of this village. It's not in the stories of knights or kings, but in the simple, everyday acts of kindness that make life a little brighter for everyone. Edwin sat back, a contented smile on his face. The crowd remained quiet, reflecting on the story. For the children, it was a lesson in generosity, but for the adults, it was a reminder of the importance of community, the kind of community that Thomas, and now Edwin, had helped to foster. As the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the village, one by one, the people of Alderwood stood up, thanked Edwin for the story, and made their way home. But something had changed in the air, a quiet resolve, a feeling of shared purpose. Edwin watched them go, his heart full. He had always believed that stories had the power to change the world, not through grand gestures, but through small, meaningful acts. And today, as he looked out over his village, he knew that Thomas's story, like many others, had found its place in the hearts of the people. The old man stood slowly, leaning on his cane, and made his way home, the cool evening breeze ruffling his coat. As he walked, he thought of all the stories yet to be told, stories of kindness, hope, and quiet courage, stories that would continue to inspire long after he was gone. And in the soft glow of the setting sun, the village of Alderwood stood as a testament to those stories, a place where kindness and generosity had become the true treasures of its people.